All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Drew, and I use he, him pronouns.
And I'm Allison. I use she, her pronouns.
And we're Sex Ed Queries.
It's the show called Sex Ed Queries, where we learn queer inclusive sex ed. Yeah.
And we are super excited to be speaking with Relian Marin today. Relian is a non-binary Jewish activist currently pursuing their MSW at the University of Denver. They've worked as a professional cuddler for 4 years, leading consent and communication workshop cuddle parties, which is just the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Their focus is in helping people overcome trauma and learn about communicating boundaries.
Welcome. We are so excited to have you with us. Thank you for your time. Seriously.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. To start off, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Where to start? I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. I have been interested in psychology since probably high school. I started getting really interested. I was more interested in criminal psychology and forensics, and my focus kind of shifted to trauma after several of my own traumatic life experiences and my inability to handle them in the ways that I would have liked to handle them, and the lack of access to the kind of support that I felt like I needed. And that really kind of drove me in the direction of I noticed these things are missing and I want to fill that void. I think that probably 90% of my work is focused around communication, having to do with, communicating your boundaries, but also your desires and the things that you want in life. And I think our society conditions us to feel like it's selfish to ask for things, when really people don't read minds. There's a much better chance of you getting what you want if you ask for it out loud. And also the flip side of that is we have to learn to be okay with the word no, right? Everyone takes it as this personal rejection, the worst thing ever. And it makes asking for things scary. But if you're okay with saying no, then it's okay to ask. And people, I feel like that's the very beginning building blocks of communication is you need to be able to ask things, and in order to be able to ask, people need to be able to say no, and that's not the way our society conditions us.
In our previous video, we discussed communication styles. So passive aggressive, and assertive. So we discussed how we all innately kind of tend to one of those four, and how we learn based on what our innate tendencies are, how to become better assertive communicators. So what's your professional opinion about this format?
I think in general, it's a really good framework. I prefer the term direct communication over assertive, because I don't think you're always trying to assert something. I don't think that's always the thing that's happening, but it is important to be direct of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, in order to understand each other. If you talk in roundabout ways, chances are there's a higher chance of the person you're talking to missing the point you're trying to make. The other thing is I do think we have kind of innate tendencies that we go towards. I think a lot of it is also socialization. Men, generally speaking, are socialized to be aggressive, are taught that that is a good thing, that's a go-getter attitude, that's how you get what you want. Women are taught that passive aggressive is pretty much the only way you're allowed to show any kind of unhappiness with anything. You cannot be direct, you cannot criticize, you cannot, it has to be these kind of side jabs in order for anyone to hear you. So I think part of it is working against our own innateness. And I think a huge part of it is, again, just responding to society and trying to undo this weird programming that we've all grown up with.
Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree with the gendered aspect of it as someone who's seen it from both sides. Do you have anything that you suggest as another good framework for thinking about communication?
Yeah, I think it's good in general to think about goals and intentions. I think it is unrealistic to expect every conversation to be after I'm going to sit and think about what I really want out of this and how I can communicate that. But in general, if I'm showing up to a conversation and the purpose is to support a friend of mine who's struggling, and my friend says something that hurts my feelings or lashes out in some way, that might not be the time for me to be like, actually, I'm really not okay with that. We need to talk about that right now, right? Because that's not my goal here. My goal is to support, and that's not going to be supportive. And I can put that aside and support right now and come back to it later and be like, actually, now I want a conversation about this other thing that bothered me. And I think you don't have to have all those thoughts fully formed out before a conversation, but I do think it's good to have some idea of like what your intention is when you go into an interaction with someone, because a lot of the time what happens is I show up with the intent to support, but I don't do that consciously, and then the person in need of support is hurting and so lashes out, which is a thing that happens all the time when people are hurting. And then I get defensive and angry and I start fighting with the person that I'm supposed to be here to support, and it would have maybe been more supportive for me to not show up at all. So I do think, yeah, that is, I don't know how to add that into the framework, but I think that's an important part that people just don't think about, because communication is a thing that just happens so naturally and comes out when other people are around that like, you don't have to put active thought and intention into it. But you kind of do if you want like healthy relationships where you're communicating in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, you've been touching on this, but what are some other key ingredients to healthy communication?
I think there's a lot to this. I think, especially because I function in the world of trauma, like so much trauma comes up and triggering happens, and it's so hard to like be on top of and aware of it while it's happening in the middle of communication and try to deal with it effectively, that like it's really hard to have like general rules of like how to not trip those triggers, you know, whatever. But in general, I think the moves are, I mean, I think you outlined some like really good things in the thing you talked about last week, where, you know, you said step one is take ownership. Like in my circles, we call that owning your experience, where like you speak from a place of like, this is what I felt, this is what happened to me, this is my reality, and that is valid. And also recognizing that like your reality is not everyone's reality, and if their reality is different, that is also valid. Like I can feel hurt and insulted, and at the same time, it can be true that you did not insult me, right? Like both of those things can happen at the same time. And people get caught up in that because like, if I'm insulted, then no, obviously you insulted me. And like, that must mean something about your intentions or your thoughts about me or something about our relationship. And it like blows up immediately when you're like, oh, I just phrased it in a way that came out not what I wanted. And like, I can rephrase it and we can avoid this whole, whatever this is. So yeah, number one, owning your experience. Like that felt to me like this, like, and checking in with curiosity. I think curiosity is a huge thing. And I know that everything I'm saying is easier said than done. Like I do this for a living and I struggle with this immensely. But yeah, showing up with like, this is how I felt and this is real and valid. And also like, what was that experience for you? Because I only know my experience. And coming from that place.